We may start by reciting Surah Al-Fatiha in honor of Sayyida Hamida, the daughter of Muslim bin Aqil. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim.
صلوا على محمد وآل محمد.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله بارئ الخلائق الأجمعين، باعث الأنبياء والمرسلين، ثم الصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء، حبيب قلوبنا وشفيع ذنوبنا، أبي القاسم محمد. والصلاة والسلام على أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين. صلى الله عليك يا مولاي يا أبا عبد الله، يا رحمة الله الواسعة، ويا باب نجاة الأمة، يا غريب الغرباء، يا مظلوم كربلاء. السلام على من جعل الله الشفاء في تربته. السلام على من الإجابة تحت قبته. السلام على ساكن كربلاء. فيا ليتنا ثم يا ليتنا كنا معكم سادتي، يا سادتي، فنفوز فوزا عظيما. قال الله تعالى في محكم كتابه الحكيم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ونزلنا عليك الكتاب بيانا لكل شيء، وهدى ورحمة وبشرى للمسلمين. صدق الله العلي العظيم وآمنا به. زينوا مجالسكم بذكر محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد. Over the last 70 to 80 years, one of the concepts that have rapidly gained popularity amongst the masses is the concept of secularism. And it would not be an exaggeration if we stated that 80% of today's current geopolitical world is divided, or their policies are shaped based on a secular principle. How do we as Muslims address, accept, or negate the concept of secularism? One of the English thinkers in the 17th century, George Jacob Holyoake, who was also a lecturer in the Birmingham Mechanics Institute, this is in about the 1800s or so, defined secularism as being a code of duty which is abided by people who feel that theology is inadequate. Based on this definition, when we look at the underlying philosophy or the widely acknowledged philosophy behind the concept of secularism, you will see that the notion is put forward that the world is rapidly moving towards being a global village, as we said a couple of nights back. And this move towards being a global village is driven by a high rate of technology and development, and the world is moving towards modernization. Whereas religion, on the other hand, is stagnant. The last divinely revealed religion was the religion of Islam that was revealed upon Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. 1400 years ago. Further concept comes forward that Islam was revealed as a religion for the people at that time, at that particular place. It is stagnant, it has become outdated, and this religion is not able to cater for the fast change of rate or the moving pace of modernization. Not only can a religion not accommodate for these changes, but rather the religion has become an impediment towards growth and modernization. And they claim and put forward examples. One of the most basic examples that are put forward is the concept of trade. And now you look at the way trade is conducted now as opposed to 70, 80 years back. Just the concept of currency in itself has evolved to a great extent. 80, 100 years back, trade was conducted through a medium called barter trade, where one good would be exchanged for another. This is how a transaction would be carried out. And then the method of transactions or the methodologies of transactions evolved over time. So after barter trade, and instead of exchanging one good for another or one cow for one sheep, for example, they moved forward to using gold coins and silver coins to denote currency. And after gold coins and silver coins were used, they moved a step forward, and method of transaction kept evolving till they started using paper currency and brass or copper for their coins. And if this currency was backed against gold, and then moving forward, even though cash or notes and coins were the common means of transactions, we are still moving on this concept, because now you will see we are basically living within a financial industry where money is hardly used. We are in an industry of using debit cards and credit cards. For the field of conducting transactions, as a very small example, has been evolving, has been in a constant change, in a constant state of change and development. Having used this as one example, the proponents or those thinkers who advocate this theory of secularism build it upon a philosophy that everything within the world is in a constant state of change. Because through development, technology, modernization, it is in a state of change. Whereas religion is a concept that is historically outdated and stagnant. Therefore, you have two concepts. You have one concept which is a variable denoted by modernization, change, technology, and you have another concept which is a constant, does not change, stagnant, which is religion. And then once we have established that everything in the world, or once they have established everything in the world is a variable and religion is a constant, they then go on to say that this constant is an impediment to the growth or the rate of change of this variable. This is the philosophy behind which or upon which the concept of secularism is built. And just like the way we analyze the concept of pluralism, we will take the same approach towards secularism. With a loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. We as Muslims, how do we respond to such a thought? We begin by challenging the underlying hypothesis, which is loosely stated as being everything within the world that we exist in is subject to change or is in a position of movement, yani is a variable. How do we challenge this? There are many concepts within the world and within our daily lives that are not variable but are established constants. For example, man, ever since the time he was created, he had two hands and he had two legs. The way he uses his two hands may have changed over time, or the way he used his two legs may change over time. Before, one could argue that a person walked towards work using his legs, but now the use of these legs have changed because he cycles towards work, for example. So over here we understand that we have a concept that is a constant, the existence of two hands and two legs, and then we have a variable, that is the usage of these limbs. Number one. Number two, since man has been created, he has always faced the feeling of hunger. Man has always felt hunger. However, the way in which he satiates this hunger, the way he fulfills this hunger has changed over time. Before, back in the day, people would go out into the fields and they would hunt for their food such that they can fill their hunger, or they would engaged in agriculture. They would cook food, for example, from scratch, like the way our women say they would grind the lasan from the beginning and fit in all the dania, whatnot, and cook from scratch. Whereas now, no, everything is ready made in the supermarkets. For the idea being that the need for a person to satisfy his hunger always existed ever since man was created. The concept of hunger is a constant, but the way in which the hunger is quenched, or the way in which the hunger is satisfied, has changed over time. So you have an element that is a constant and you have an element that is a variable. You take again a third example. Man, ever since he was created, he was prone to getting sick. Ever since the history of man has come into play, you will see that if man did not take care of his body, he would be exposed to sicknesses. So being exposed to sickness is a constant. It is a factor that has been happening throughout the creation of man. However, the way in which a person cures his sickness, which is denoted by the change in the field of medicine from the time of herbal medicines to now what is chemical compositions or the full pharmaceutical industry, the way in which a person cures his sickness has changed. So the concept of a human being getting sick is a constant, and the way he cures his sickness is a variable. If we understand these basic examples, then we are able to negate the underlying philosophy, or one part of the underlying philosophy upon which the secular school of thought is built, which is everything in the realm of existence, or everything in the world in which we live, is subject to change. We say, "La, this is invalid," and we have the most simplest of examples where a person does not need to be a rocket scientist in order to understand these. Number one. Number two, they come up, or they come forward with the theory that everything that is a constant is an impediment to that which is a variable. Because we said modernization, growth, and technology is symbolized as a state of change, and whatever is a state of change is deemed as a variable. So they say that these constants, things that are stagnant, such as religion, this constant is an impediment to this variable. Now, we want to understand the relationship between a constant and the relationship between a variable. What is the relationship between these two? Is it that every constant element negates or opposes a variable element, or do we have certain constant elements that support variable elements? This is a talk, or this is an area which we will go into such that we can understand the stance of Islam when it comes to secularism. This theory that every constant is an impediment to variables is incorrect. Again, we can prove this from academic fields and modern science that all of us are acknowledged, or all of us are familiar with. You take, for example, the concept of pi. You take pi. Pi, the pie in the supermarket that we eat, mathematical pi, 3.14159 or 152. Either way, to 2 decimal points, 3.14. You take this concept of mathematical pi, 3.14. The concept of pi has been one of the most fundamental and detrimental formulas in the field of cosmology, in the field of physics, in the field of engineering, in the field of medicine, in the field of architecture. This concept of pi 3.14 was probably, according to many sources, set forward within or during the 17th century. And all of these fields that we have spoken about or have listed, each and every one of them revolve around or depend upon this concept pi 3.14 for their existence. So if this concept of pi, this formula of pi was established in the 17th century and the field of physics is dependent on this theory of pi, look at the field of physics now compared to the 17th century. How much has physics developed and changed over these last 200, 300 years? The way physics was taught, the applications of physics in the 17th century is not the same application of physics today in the 21st century. There has been a milestone of movements and achievements within the field of physics. However, despite all these changes in the field of physics or within the science of physics, this represents a variable in order for physics to grow and develop over time. Do you find physicists come and say that now we need to change the formula of pi because pi as a formula is a constant and is a barrier or an impediment to the growth within the field of physics? La, you don't find this. So from here, we are able to understand that pi as a constant formula, as a concept which is a constant, is absolutely necessary. Its existence is important, such that the field of physics and its modernization and its progress can be deduced from this constant. Hence, the growth of a variable is contingent upon the existence of a constant. You don't have anybody come and tell you, okay, because physics has developed so much, we need to change pi. Pi 3.14 was a number given in the 17th century. Now we live in the 21st century, and this restriction of pi as 3.14, we now need to change it to 5.2 so that it can suit our needs in the 21st century. Do you agree to such a concept? La, you laugh on the guy. Hence, in the same way that we laugh at a person who makes such a suggestion, we laugh at the philosophers who came with the concept of secularism, that everything that is a constant is an impediment and needs to be changed. If this is the case, then apply this concept of change in the field of physics and look at the havoc that breaks forward. What happens if you get rid of this established existence, the formula of 3.14, which denotes pi? The whole field of physics and engineering and everything goes down the drain. Chaos, because you come back to square one where you are formulating a constant formula upon which you can build an entire field. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Subhanallah. And this is the point of view of Islam. This is the perspective of Islam when it comes to these relationships between constant and variables. The Quran represents the Quran and the Sunnah of the Ahlul Bayt. For subhanallah, Islam is of this opinion. Islam's point of view in relationships to constants and variables is this, in that Islam tells us that the Quran and the Sunnah of the Ahlul Bayt are those set of established concepts which are represented as constants, and they form the basis or a framework upon which growth, development and modernization of the world is built upon. The Quran, through the way the verses of the Quran are revealed and the nature of the ahadith that have emanated from people who are at the highest level of eloquence, in many ways represent a general constant framework upon which variables can be deduced. And these deduced variables are then applied to facilitate for growth and change until the end of time. Not only do they facilitate for growth and change until the end of time, but they set the path for technology change and modernization till the end of time. If this is the case, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala points towards this in the Quran, in Surah An-Nahl verse 89, which we quoted at the beginning of the khutbah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, وَنَزَّلْنَا عَلَيْكَ الْكِتَابَ تِبْيَانًا لِكُلِّ شَيْءٍ وَهُدًى وَرَحْمَةً وَبُشْرَى لِلْمُسْلِمِينَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that we have revealed for you the book, yani the Quran, تِبْيَانًا لِكُلِّ شَيْءٍ, which is an explanation, which is a manifestation that contains the manifestation of each and every possible concept that you can think of, in each and every possible dimension of life that you could think of. Which is why the next three words in the ayah point towards this concept. Wahudan, it is guidance. Guidance not only in the field of theology, but guidance in selecting economic reforms, guidance in designating political policies, guidance in setting a social environment through which a state can progress. And the effect of this huda and guidance is what? It manifests the rahmah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the mercy of Allah, because then man live in happiness, and the effect of this happiness, this rahmah, is what? Bushra lil mu'mineen or lil muslimin, glad tidings. If this is our belief, and this is what the verse of the Quran states, then we put forward a question. If the Quran in itself contains an explanation, and within the Quran it contains a solution for every possible problem or obstacle that man could face, why is the Muslim world in such a turmoil today? Why is the Middle East suffering from one of the highest levels of illiteracy as compared to the rest of the world? Why is it that atrocities committed against human rights in so-called Islamic countries is at a high as compared to any other country? Why is it that Islamic thinkers or Muslim scholars or Muslim countries are not able to come forward with political solutions to challenge global issues today? Either they are wrong or the Quran, wal-ayadu billah, is wrong. Now, when we go out at an interfaith level, or when we say we are Muslims, and we believe in the Quran, verse for verse, letter for letter, the Quran is telling us, تِبْيَانًا لِكُلِّ شَيْءٍ. It is an explanation for everything. Tayyib, come and show us from the Quran, where is an economic system, where is a political system? Do we have any of this guidance when it comes to foreign policy, for example, between Muslim countries? Do we have guidance like this in the Quran? And if it is there, how do we deduce them? Do they exist in the Quran or no? To respond to this objection, we come back to the academic field. And I don't want to turn this Majlis Husseini into a physics classroom, but for the sake of simplicity, and it is something that we relate to, for inshallah it will be appropriate to mention this. Arguably, one of the greatest contributors to the field of calculus in the 17th century was Isaac Newton. With the contributions that he made to this mathematical field, calculus, in the 17th century, the field of mathematics developed until many years later, and probably centuries after. Biologists came forward and they started to calculate the rate of growth of bacteria using formulas given in the field of calculus. Many hundred years later, electrical engineers came and they were able to measure the distance of electric cables between two poles because of the curve or the loop that it has, using principles of calculus. Many hundreds of years later, after Isaac Newton, you see that financial industry and the credit card industry in particular calculates our annual interest on a credit card using theories or principles taught within the field of calculus. You come forward to the field of space engineering, you will see that a space engineer is able to calculate the gravitational impact on the spacecraft using fundamental principles taught in calculus. Ya subhanallah, there has been technology and progress and development in multiple fields that are unrelated, because all these multiple fields were able to go back towards this certain concept and build upon it such that they can use it in different aspects of the life. Correct? All these variables which are a change or a development in all these different fields has come into existence because they have built upon a concept which is already established, the concepts that are established by Isaac Newton in the field of calculus. So then we come up and we tell the secular world that these concepts that were laid forward by Isaac Newton within the field of calculus, for them to be positively used to facilitate for change and growth and development, it was contingent or it was necessary for the existence of a scientist in every day and age who would be able to understand these core concepts and then deduce variables from them and apply them in the fields so that they can develop. Subhanallah. The same thing with the Quran. The Quran in every age and every generation, just like the way the secular world needs a scientist to come forward in every age and generation to understand these concepts and deduce a new meaning from them, we say to the Muslim world that in every age and generation, for us to extrapolate and to deduce new meanings from the Quran, we must have an Imam present in every day and age. Ajib, that even this concept of secularism, despite it being batil, through their own thought processes, through their own seerah, they themselves warrant and acknowledge the existence or the concept of the necessity of the existence of a 12th Imam, even without knowing. This in itself is a sign of the truth of the madhab of Islam. This is a sign that the madhab or the religion of Islam is a religion that is fitri. فطرة الله التي فطر الناس إليها. This religion is a religion of fitra. It comes back to man's natural response to go back towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is from amongst the natural beliefs of a person, an inbred characteristic within him to believe in the existence of a 12th Imam, even if he may not consciously accept or submit to this fact. For Islam negates the concept and the philosophy upon which secularism is built. Number one, that everything within the realm of existence is a variable law. And number two, the fact that every constant that exists is an impediment to a variable. Islam rejects this notion, which is why Islam does not advocate separation between state and religion like the rest of the secularists say. Why? Because Islam is of the opinion that the Quran holds guidance for the people and in itself is a constitution that can be amended through istidlal and ijtihad and istinbat to cater for all the problems of mankind until the day of judgment. One simple example. You have the verse of the Quran that we looked at a couple of nights back. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. La ikraha fi din. La ikraha fi din. There is no compulsion in religion. A simple verse. La ikraha fi din. 4 letters or 4 words it is comprised of. 1 sentence. Yet this 1 sentence, if a person contemplated and thought over this single statement, he would see that this statement in itself, after contemplation, holds the guidelines and the rules towards interfaith debates. You will see that this one sentence teaches us how to coexist peacefully in a multi-ethnic cosmopolitan surrounding. Through this one ayah, you will see that it is the basis of foreign policy between Muslim countries and non-Muslim countries. But who is there to think about and extrapolate these verses from the Quran? And the people who hold the madhab of truth are oppressed. The world is in need of the 12th Imam and the arrival of the Mahdi. Ajjalallahu ta'ala farajahu sharif. Such that they may use the divine concepts within the Quran to facilitate for change and modernization, and that mankind can reach the highest level of technology. Muslim countries and the resources that they hold are sufficient to come and to benefit from the madhab of Ahlul Bayt. But despite using the Quran and despite using the Sunnah as a manhaj to move forward, you see that the Islamic countries themselves have moved towards a path of secularism and building themselves upon a secular model. Even within the Shia school of thought, a lot of the organizations, a lot of the people who claim to work under the banner of Islam, work under a banner of a secular movement. Why? One of two things. There is no confidence in the Quran and in the Sunnah that we believe. Or number two, the people who run these organizations or the people who run these associations under the name of Islam themselves have not studied enough such that they may extrapolate to. And the third one is the obvious munafiq, where he knows that if he implements Islam in his life and runs Islam or runs these organizations or countries as per the Quran and the Sunnah, it will lead towards them being deposed from their position. Yazid, when he stood to take the Khilafah, his basis and the model of rule was that based on a secular model. However, he tried to justify a secular way of life by giving it the guide of Khilafah, by posing himself as the Khalif who is designated by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. For when we choose a path and a way of life, we need to fully understand the ramifications and select a path that will not only give us happiness in the akhirah but in the dunya. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. And this is what Salman al-Muhammadi said after the time of Saqifa, when he stood in front of Masjid al-Nabawi and the rights of Amir al-Mu'mineen were usurped from him. Salman went into the mosque crying out to the people, "O Muslims, if you were to submit to the wilayah of Amirul Mu'mineen, then you would see how the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala descends upon you, and you will see how you will be encompassed by the bounties of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala." Where would these mercies, where would these bounties of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala come from? Would it just be through the form of a miracle, in which there is no doubt Amirul Mu'mineen performed? But the ideology behind Salman was that when you leave out Amirul Mu'mineen and select somebody else over him, you have chosen a person who does not have the same qualifications of Amirul Mu'mineen, a person who can use the Quran and the Sunnah to properly govern a country towards success. Rather, you are selecting people whose judgments are flawed, who are fallible in their decision-making process. If not, at the very least, have no best interest for Islam but to take the Khilafah to serve their own self-interests. This was the biggest calamity of Islam. When you look at the pathetic state of Muslim countries right now, it is because they have abandoned the rule of Ahlul Bayt. They have abandoned the manhaj and the tafasir of Ahlul Bayt when it came to using it as a constitution upon which a government should be ruled. One time, Amir al-Mu'mineen was walking or was traveling back from the Battle of Siffin towards Kufa. And while he was returning back from Siffin, he stopped at the river Furat and he picked up the water from the Furat in his hands and he looked at it. And the companions were around him and they were watching Amir al-Mu'mineen. He picked the water with his hands, but he didn't say anything. He dropped the water back into the Furat. He took the water and he looked at it. At this time, one of his companions that were next to Amir al-Mu'mineen, they said, "Bi-abi anta wa ummi ya Amir al-Mu'mineen." He said, "May my father and mother be sacrificed for you, ya Amir al-Mu'mineen." What is so special about the water of Furat that you keep looking at it in this way? For Amir al-Mu'mineen said to this companion, "With this water, if I wanted, I would be able to bring light to the entire world." This person probably didn't understand what Amir al-Mu'mineen was saying. He said, "Sadaqt ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, for nur to come into every house from this handful of water by way of miracle might be mu'jiza, and you are the successor of Rasulullah, we accept." He said, "Sadaqti ya Amir al-Mu'mineen." However, the ma'siyah or the tribulation over here, the heart and the biggest of all tragedies over here is what? That the ashab didn't ask Amir al-Mu'mineen, how would you enlighten the world with water? He just said, "You are right, ya Amir al-Mu'mineen." When Amir al-Mu'mineen picked the water of Furat and said, "Through this water, I can enlighten the entire world or the whole of Iraq," he was thinking about the concept of hydroelectric power. Ya subhanallah, use hydroelectricity to power the houses inside, bring nur into the house. But the knowledge of Amir al-Mu'mineen at one side, the understanding of the companions at one side, and maybe perhaps you could not blame them for having thought about these concepts at that time, but the blame is that they did not benefit from the knowledge that Amir al-Mu'mineen contained within his heart. The only Imam from all other madhabs that exist within Islam, the only Imam to have sat on the minbar and said, "Salluni qabla an tafqiduni." Ask me whatever you want before you leave me. So al-mutlaq, they say, it's not constrained. Not that Amir al-Mu'mineen sat on the minbar just to give fatwa in the rules of fiqh and how to pray and how to fast and how to do sawm and zakat. And it is important and in its place. But Amir al-Mu'mineen, when he said Saluni, he said, "Ask me about the parts of the skies and the parts of the heavens and I shall inform you of them." An open chance for the people to seek benefit from the knowledge of Amir al-Mu'mineen in any field that they wanted. Do you know the question that turned up? The people, all of them, numb. None of them said anything, probably because of their lack of interest in the knowledge of Amir al-Mu'mineen. Because the Khilafah or the Khulafa who had come before Amir al-Mu'mineen had set up a path of ignorance, where the Imam was a person who was of limited benefit, perhaps for that reason, or the lack of interest from the people themselves. But when Amir al-Mu'mineen said, "Salluni qabla an tafkiduni," nobody asked a single question except one person, Sa'ad ibn Abu Waqqas, the father of Umar ibn Sa'ad in Karbala. He said, "Ya Ali, if you have knowledge about everything and anything in the earth, then tell me how many hairs are there in my beard." This is the question that he asked Amir al-Mu'mineen. This is the tragedy of the Muslims. The state of the Muslim Ummah today is because of the blunders committed at the time of Amir al-Mu'mineen and the persistence of the Muslim world to hold enmity towards Ahlul Bayt and the madhab of Ahlul Bayt. If these countries think they are Islamic countries and these kings think that they are the khuddam of the Haramain, then instead of sponsoring terrorism against the school of Ahlul Bayt, go and help the people of Gaza. Antum, you have seen what is happening in Gaza over the last couple of days. The atrocities, the people who are being killed. Tell these people who are the khadim of the Haramain, stop sponsoring the killing of Shia Muslims in Bahrain, and Shia killings in Pakistan, and Shia killings in Africa. In Africa, yesterday there was a bomb blast in Nairobi, in one of the Somali areas known as Isli. 7 people died. Convert, person who had absolutely no idea of anything about Islam. These Salafis and Wahhabis come, brainwash the people, infijar, straight. The money and the resources that are being used there, send it towards Palestine. Inta khadimul haramain. Where is it when it comes to this issue? And the people who support them are the ones who get gunned down for their theological belief. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. For it becomes of vital importance for us as a madhab, as we move forward and we advance in our academic fields. We have amongst us doctors, scholars, dentists, human rights activists. We need people who will concentrate on Islam, concentrate in the field of hadith and Quran, and extrapolate these new ideas that will help Islam and the entire human world, to help the entire human world through Islam to move forward and solve global crisis. We need people from the Shia Ummah who can bring to light the treasures behind the words of Ahlul Bayt. And these are the days to make such a pledge. With the barakat of Sayyid al-Shuhada, one person dedicates a time of his life to write a thesis, to write an article on the subject of human rights within Islam, use the Quran as a constitution, use the ahadith of Ahlul Bayt as a constitution. Let us set a new standard and a new height for human rights in the world. Why should we follow, for example, the UN? Not to condemn them or criticize them or anything, but why is the Muslim world always following rather than taking the forefront when it comes to these issues? Number one. And number two, always ask yourselves, why did the Muslim end up in the situation that they are? The Imams, the A'imma of Ahlul Bayt, the designated awliya, instead of the world, instead of the Ummah, from that time till today, honoring them and respecting them, if not at the very minimum succumbing to their obedience. How did they treat Ahlul Bayt? You have one from the A'imma who was struck by a sword on his head while he was in the mihrab. You have amongst the A'imma those who were poisoned over time. One to the extent that the strength of the poison was such that he coughed out pieces of his liver. Because of the atrocities committed over the Imams of Ahlul Bayt over time, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala willed for the final Imam to go into Ghaibah. The world is in need of a 12th Imam who can raise us, who can bring us out from the depth of humiliation and poverty and a life of disgrace. We are in need of the 12th Imam who will bring this religion and let it shine, take it away from the grasp of these people who have hijacked it and portray Islam as a barbaric religion. And each and every one of us have a responsibility and duty towards ensuring that the dhuhur of the 12th Imam happens in our lifetime, through our actions. If all of us are indifferent to the action, the dhuhur of the 12th Imam will not happen in our lifetime. Just like the way it didn't happen in the lifetime of our fathers and grandfathers and grandfathers before. Our destiny is in our hands. We can determine whether the dhuhur of the 12th Imam can happen during our lifetime or no. We need that courage and we need that determination. Number three, we need that loyalty. Because a person might have courage and he might have determination, but does not have loyalty. And all our 11 Imams have been let down because of lack of loyalty. And Allah's promise to the 12th was that your situation will not be that you are held ransom to unloyal companions. Which is why the Imam is in Ghaibah. هذا هو. These Majalis Husseini are the perfect platform to build your loyalty towards Imam. Build your loyalty through love, and build your love through your emotions for the Imam. When you live these days, these 12, 15 days of Muharram, in fact till Arba'een, live your life in these days as if you were in the camp of Sayyid al-Shuhada. During the day, while you are at work, while you are at school, always moments to say to yourself before Salah or after Salah, what would happen if I was in Karbala in 61 AH? What would be my stance now? How would I be responding to the increment of enemies day after day? I need to think about this and use this as a stimulus to change my life. There is no stronger tool than Azadari for this. Your latam and your weeping and your wailing. And inshallah the concept of latam we will touch in the coming days. Because unfortunately the people who are enemies towards this don't understand that these actions within themselves carry a potential and a zeal, a fervor that needs to be harvested within the youth such that they have the courage to go up tomorrow and say no to dhulm. Wa inshallah antum you are from the mu'mineen. And we pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on a night like this that He can give us the tawfiq for understanding the religion and then serving the religion, and that we may have the tawfiq of harvesting the love of Ahlul Bayt within our hearts. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. The night of Ashura, or the day of Ashura, was a day of intensity. The sun has risen, the desert heat is scorching. As we said, the camp of Yazid attacked the camp of Sayyid al-Shuhada in a first attack in which 50 companions died right after. Thereafter, the whole morning, the fields of Karbala were filled with echoes of galloping horses, people shouting, women wailing. The scene of Karbala, the sand of Karbala had changed into an ocean of blood, scattered with mangled bodies and cut hands and cut heads. At this time, there were sporadic attacks between the camp of Sayyid al-Shuhada and the camp of Umar ibn Sa'ad. Many times the camp of Umar ibn Sa'ad would move forward to attack the camp of Sayyid al-Shuhada, but the companions who remained with Imam Hussein were very staunch in their defense, for they had adopted a defensive tactic through which the camps of the women would not be penetrated. For therefore they kept their ground. Many times the camp of Umar ibn Sa'ad would come forward with one contingency, attack and then retreat. After some time they would regroup, attack and then they would retreat. On one such occasion, when there had been a number of attacks such as these, Umar ibn Sa'ad raised or mobilized a contingency of 1,000 horsemen under the command of Amr ibn Hujjaj, and he ordered Amr ibn Hujjaj to attack the Khaymaga or the camps of Sayyid al-Shuhada from the side of the river Furat. So this Amr ibn Hujjaj, la'natullah alayhi, came with a contingency of about 150 to 200 horsemen attacking the camp of Sayyid al-Shuhada from the side of Furat. At this time, the Maqatil tells us, or the Maqatil tell us, that Imam Hussein mobilized his army and put forward a number of companions to withhold the attack of Amr ibn Hujjaj from the left side, yani from the side of Furat. The horsemen clashed and met each other. The Maqtal tells us that this battle in itself, or this one part of the battle itself, lasted for an entire hour. The camp of Imam Hussein was so firmly established on their grounds that Amr ibn Hujjaj had to retreat. So Hamid ibn Muslim says, when Amr ibn Hujjaj retreated, We saw the dust had filled the air. We waited for a while for the dust to settle down, and we saw thousands of bodies across the lands of Karbala, most of them from the enemies and a few from the camp of Sayyid al-Shuhada. And one of the people who had fallen down was a companion known as Muslim ibn Awsaja. Salam to the companions who understood the rights of Sayyid al-Shuhada. Salam upon those companions who gave away and sacrificed everything that they possessed for Sayyid al-Shuhada. Salam on those companions who sacrificed their lives for Sayyid al-Shuhada. These were men of steel, men of honor, who would rather have their jugular veins cut rather than see the enemies even scratch Sayyid al-Shuhada. These are the ashab that we need to emulate and take as examples. If there are lessons of loyalty and lessons of determination, then we owe it to the shuhada of Karbala that we follow in their examples, and we cultivate this love that we have been talking about in the hearts for our 12th Imam. On a night like this, when we honor the companions of Sayyid al-Shuhada, we seek their wasila and ask them to inspire us with the nur of wilayah such that we can serve our Imam in the way they served their Imam. Muslim ibn Awsaja Ba'ad was one of the commanders of the left wing of the army of Muslim bin Aqil. When he saw Muslim bin Aqil had been deserted, Muslim bin Aqil asked him and Habib ibn Madahir to go, you can say, underground, to hide themselves and to conceal themselves from the rest of the people. And Muslim bin Aqil's last advice to them was that Hussein needs you more in Karbala than I need you here in Kufa. And this is how Habib ibn Madahir and Muslim ibn Awsaja reached Karbala, even though they were there during the time of Muslim bin Aqil. For Muslim bin Aqil, as the dust settled down, the people saw that Muslim bin Aqil is lying on the desert, his body covered in wounds, to the extent that Muslim ibn Awsaja was struggling to breathe. At this time, the Maqtal tells us that Sayyid al-Shuhada and Habib ibn Madahir ran towards Muslim ibn Awsaja. Sayyid al-Shuhada sat by Muslim bin Awsaja. He put his head on his lap. He wiped the sand and the blood off his forehead, and he said, Rahimakallah ya Muslim, intasa'irun ilal Jannah. He says, may Allah have mercy upon you, ya Muslim ibn Awsaja, for indeed you are going towards heaven. And then Habib ibn Madahir is by the side of Sayyid al-Shuhada. Habib turns down and whispers into the ear of Muslim ibn Awsaja. He says, ya Muslim, if I knew that I was living or I had life after you, I would have asked you to give me your will, your wasiyah, your last testament over the things that concern you, because Muslim ibn Awsaja had come with his wife and with his children. For Muslim ibn Awsaja, at this state, while he is struggling to take his last breath, the Maqtal tells us that tears started to roll down his eyes, and he told Muslim ibn Awsaja, Usika bihada. He says that I'm giving you my last will, by pointing at Sayyid al-Shuhada, telling him my last will to you is that take care of this man. Muslim ibn Awsaja tells Habib ibn Madahir, make sure that this man is not harmed so long as you live alive. Habib ibn Madahir tells Muslim ibn Awsaja, this is my guarantee to you that our Imam shall not even face a scratch so long as the blood runs within the veins of Habib. Allah, Allah. Habib ibn Madahir and Sayyid al-Shuhada take the body of Muslim ibn Awsaja back to the tent. Muslim's wife begins to weep and wail, and at that time a young child comes out into the battlefield. Sayyid Sayyid al-Shuhada looks at this young child. Do you know who he is? He is an 11-year-old child, the son of Muslim ibn Awsaja. For Sayyid al-Shuhada tells this young child, where are you going? Your mother has just been afflicted by a great tragedy. She has just lost her husband. And now, how can she lose her son? Go back, my son. Go back to your mother and give her comfort. Do you know what this son said to Sayyid al-Shuhada? He said, Ba'athatni ummi. He says, my mother has sent me to the battlefield. She is the one who has told me to go. For Sayyid al-Shuhada looked at this woman and he says, oh woman, have this son, keep him, lest he may be a source of comfort to you. Do you know what this woman said to Sayyid al-Shuhada? Inshallah, our sisters are listening. The zeal and the nur of wilaya in our hearts that should be there in raising our children. Inshallah, our younger brothers who are sitting over here take example from the courage of the children of Muslim ibn Awsaja. The woman tells Sayyid al-Shuhada, this mother tells Sayyid al-Shuhada, how is it that Zahra will lose her son and I don't lose my son? She tells Imam Hussein, with what face will I meet Sayyid al-Zahra? Allah, this 11-year-old child walks into the battlefield and he recites a poem. And he recites a poem saying that my master is Hussein, and what a mercy of a master Hussein is. The Maktal tells us that this 11-year-old boy killed 30 people until he was killed. The enemies beheaded him and threw his head back into the camp. The mother looked at the head of her son and she said, Ahsan, she said, thank you my son. At least now when I go to Sayyid al-Zahra, I will tell her that I gave everything I had for the sake of my son. Allah, all this happening within the tents. The war is intense. At this time, it approaches the time of Zawal. And the time of Salah is approaching. For one of the companions tells Sayyid al-Shuhada that the time of Salah has set in. Sayyid al-Shuhada tells him, may Allah have mercy upon you for remembering Salah. Inshallah, mu'mineen, my brothers and sisters, you are all muwalis, you are all lovers of Sayyid al-Shuhada, and keep your Salah strong and pray for the tawfiq that may Allah grant us a strong Salah. Ya Allah. At this point, one of the persons from the enemies of the camp of Yazid, his name being Hasin ibn Numair, looks at Sayyid al-Shuhada, because at this time Sayyid al-Shuhada asked Habib ibn Madahir to tell the enemies of Umar ibn Sa'ad to stop the fighting temporarily such that they may recite their Salah. At that time, even the camp of Yazid recited Salah. So when Habib ibn Madahir asked for permission for the war to be temporarily halted such that they can pray, this person, Hasin ibn Numair, looks at Sayyid al-Shuhada and he says to him, why do you even waste your time praying? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not accept your prayer. Come forward and fight with me. At this point, Habib ibn Madahir could not bear this. How dare you talk to the master of Jannah, Sayyid al-Shabab Ahlul Jannah? Is it possible that Sayyid al-Shuhada's prayers are not accepted and your prayers are accepted? How dare you even have the audacity to talk to my master like this? Hasin was persistent in killing the Imam. For Habib ibn Madahir took permission from the Imam saying, Ya Sayyid al-Shuhada, I cannot bear this insult. Give me permission to fight against Hasin, and I will recite my Salah in heaven in the company of your grandfather and your father and your brother Hassan. Sayyid al-Shuhada gives him permission. Habib ibn Madahir goes into the battlefield riding his horse, reciting the poem that I am Habib, the son of Madahir, defender of the madhab of Ahlul Bayt. I shall show you the sharpness of my sword until you retrieve away from killing my master. Habib comes into the battlefield with his sword. He attacks Hasin ibn Numair. The swordsmanship of Habib ibn Madahir is unmatched. He injured Hasin. Hasin fell off his horse. The coward that he was, the people from his tribe came and they carried Hasin away. Habib ibn Madahir is in the battlefield riding his horse with his sword. At this time, one horseman came forward and warriors came forward to challenge him on a duel one by one. The Maktal tells us Habib ibn Madahir was 73 years of age, but despite his old age, despite his thirst, he killed 60 men on the battlefield in this single attack. when Umar ibn Sa'ad and Shimr saw that there is no way that they can overcome Habib ibn Madahir, he asked, or he ordered his army to attack Habib ibn Madahir from all sides. So they started shooting arrows at Habib ibn Madahir. Habib ibn Madahir got off his horse because his horse was injured while he was on the ground covering himself from arrows. At one time, a person by the name of Mazraj came forward and struck Habib ibn Madahir on the head with a sword. Allah, Allah, when Habib ibn Madahir was stuck on the head, blood began to flow down his face. At this time, a person from Tamim came and he pierced Habib ibn Madahir with a spear. The Maktal tells us that the other end of the spear came out from the back of Habib ibn Madahir. Allah, Allah, Habib ibn Madahir fell down to the ground, but he was still breathing. Habib said, so long as I have breath in my body, I will stand up to defend Sayyid al-Shuhada. Look at the courage of the ashab of Sayyid al-Shuhada. The Maktal tells us Habib ibn Madahir stood up from the battlefield with a spear pierced in his stomach coming out from his back. His head was bleeding. At this time, the coward Hasin ibn Numair, who was injured, came back to take revenge from Habib ibn Madahir. At this vulnerable stage, Hasin came and struck a powerful blow on the head of Habib ibn Madahir, splitting his skull into half. Habib fell to the ground. His soul was lifted to Jannah. Do you know what happened at this time? A person from Tamim, the person who stabbed him with a spear, came and beheaded Habib ibn Madahir on the battleground. Do you know what happened after this? Him and Hasin began to fight over who would take the head. This one says, I killed Habib. That one says, I killed Habib. This one says, I want a reward from Yazid. That one says, I want a reward from Yazid. The Maktal tells us that these two people who are on the same side of the army were about to kill themselves fighting over who should take the head of Habib, until the head was given to Hasin. Hasin tied the head of Habib ibn Madahir on a horse and started parading around the battlefield of Karbala. All this while Sayyid al-Shuhada is looking and wiping his tears. He said, Habib, my childhood friend Habib. Allah, Allah, there came a time where Sayyid al-Shuhada on the day of Ashura stood in the battlefield all by himself. There is not a single man within the tents. The enemies are marauding and surrounding the camps of the women. At this time, Sayyid al-Shuhada came towards the battlefield and he looked at the mangled and decapitated bodies of his companions and he began to cry out, Ya Ashab al-Safa, Ya Hayaja'ul Fursan, Mali ad'ukum wa ma tasma'un, ad'ukum wa la tujibun, Aina anta ya hur. At this time, Sayyid al-Shuhada is by himself. He goes to the dead bodies of his companions. He says to them, my companions, where are you? Why are you sleeping? And I'm calling out to you. Habib, I am saying labbaik. Why don't you wake up, Habib? Where are the companions who will defend the women of Rasulullah? Mata bi Hussein.